The white walls of Research Station Beta 7 hummed with the steady drone of advanced alien technology. In Section C, behind thick, transparent barriers, 4 human children sat in what looked like a normal classroom. But this was no ordinary school. Director First Light stood watching through the observation window, his tall, gray form reflecting in the reinforced glass. His large, dark eyes blinked slowly as he made notes on his datapad. The children were doing something he found deeply confusing. They were laughing. "I fail to understand," he said to his assistant, "why they find entertainment in drawing incorrect representations of our staff." He pointed at a paper one of the children held up, a funny drawing of an alien with extremely exaggerated features. Tom, the oldest at 12 years old, had started this particular bout of chaos. He was always the one who got the others going. His brown hair stuck up in all directions as he demonstrated his best impression of Director First Light's walking style, making the other children burst into more laughter. The Praxians had chosen these 4 children carefully from different human colonies, believing they represented a good sample of human young. They couldn't have been more wrong. These weren't average children. They were exceptional in ways the aliens couldn't comprehend. "Security scan report," a computerized voice announced overhead. "All subjects displaying normal behavior patterns within acceptable parameters." Director First Light made another note. The security system was one of the most advanced in the galaxy, designed to detect any sign of rebellion or escape attempts. But it had one major flaw. It was programmed based on adult behavioral patterns. In the classroom, Andy was secretly watching the security sensors while pretending to draw. At 11, he had already figured out more about the alien technology than the Praxians realized. His blue eyes darted between the sensors, mapping their coverage in his mind. Rose sat quietly in the corner, her hands folded neatly on the desk. She was the observer, taking in every detail of their captors' routines. At 10 years old, she had already memorized the patrol schedules, shift changes, and even the small gestures that indicated when an alien guard was getting tired. Little Mike, just 8 years old, was doing what he did best, looking completely innocent while causing subtle chaos. He had discovered that if he hummed at just the right frequency, it made the alien's sensory appendages twitch uncomfortably. He was currently testing different pitches, watching with hidden amusement as the guard by the door kept shaking his head. "The human children have been here for 30 days now," Director First Light dictated to his datapad. "While they show signs of high intelligence, they appear to waste significant time on illogical activities. This confirms our initial hypothesis that humans require strict guidance to reach their full potential." He couldn't have been more wrong. What he saw as wasted time was actually an elaborate performance. Each laugh, each game, each seemingly pointless activity was part of the children's own research project, studying their captors. The Praxians had chosen this remote space station for their research facility because it was far from regular trade routes. The station orbited a quiet gas giant in a system most ships never visited. They thought this made it secure. In reality, they had just given their test subjects a contained environment to turn into their playground. "Begin evening routine," the computer announced. The children lined up dutifully, following their programmed schedule. Director First Light nodded with satisfaction. Everything was proceeding according to plan. But as the children walked to their sleeping quarters, they exchanged quick glances, their own secret code. Tom scratched his ear. "Ready?" Andy touched his nose. Systems mapped. Rose brushed her hair back. Guards memorized. Mike hopped slightly in line, found the weak spots. The Praxians had made 3 critical mistakes. First, they assumed that human children thought like smaller versions of adults. Second, they believed that chaos and play were signs of inferior thinking. And third, most importantly, they thought they were the ones doing the research. As the lights dimmed for the night cycle, Director First Light reviewed his daily notes with satisfaction. The subjects were adapting well to containment. Everything was proceeding in a logical, orderly fashion. He had no idea that order was the last thing he should expect when dealing with human children. The chaos hadn't even begun. Nighttime on Research Station Beta 7 wasn't really dark. The soft blue glow from the gas giant outside filled the children's sleeping quarters with strange, moving shadows. Most adults would find it unsettling. The children had turned it into a game. Tom lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling, counting the seconds between guard patrols. He wasn't the biggest kid from Earth Colony, but he was the one the others looked to for leadership. Right now, his mind was busy putting together all the pieces of information they'd gathered over the past month. "They think we're sleeping," he whispered, just loud enough for the others to hear. The Praxians had excellent technology, but they hadn't figured out that human children could whisper below their sensor detection levels. Andy rolled over in his bed, his eyes shining in the blue light. "Their main computer has a backup cycle at 300 hours, he whispered back. That's when the sensors reset for exactly 3.8 seconds. He had spent weeks timing it perfectly, pretending to count ceiling tiles while actually counting seconds. From her bed near the window, Rose added her own report. "Guard Blue Shell always takes an extra long break after his meals. Something about their food makes them sleepy." She had been watching the guards so carefully that she could tell them apart just by how they walked. Little Mike sat up in his bed, hugging his knees. "I found another tube in the walls," he said proudly. "It goes all the way to the storage room." His small size had turned out to be their biggest advantage. The Praxians had designed their ventilation systems for maintenance robots, never thinking a human child could fit through them. Tom smiled in the darkness. "Tell me what you found in the science lab today, Andy." Andy's eyes lit up with excitement. "They have this huge machine they use to study our brainwaves. But here's the funny thing. It only works on organized thought patterns. When we just let our minds wander and think random thoughts, it gets all confused." Rose giggled softly. "That's why they get so worried when we play pretend games. Their machines can't understand what we're thinking because we're imagining things that aren't real." "Like yesterday," Mike added, "when we were pretending the floor was lava. Their sensors went crazy trying to figure out why we wouldn't step on the floor." The children had discovered something the Praxians couldn't understand. Imagination was their superpower. Every game they played, every story they made up, every pretend scenario they created made the aliens' logical systems malfunction just a little bit more. Tom sat up slowly, careful not to make his bed creak. "Remember what they taught us about their species in the lessons?" he asked. The others nodded. The Praxians spent hours every day trying to teach the children about proper logical behavior. "Well," Tom continued, "they're so focused on doing things the right way that they never think about doing things the wrong way on purpose." He paused, letting that sink in. "And that's going to be their biggest mistake." Andy caught on first. "You mean like how they always expect us to walk in straight lines to get somewhere?" "Exactly," Tom grinned. "They don't understand why anyone would skip or hop or crawl when walking is more efficient." Rose sat up too, her eyes wide with understanding. "And they think we're just being silly when we make up songs or rhymes." "But really," Mike finished excitedly, "we're memorizing their schedules and rules." The children shared a moment of silent triumph. The Praxians had created the perfect prison, designed to hold logical, predictable beings. But they had never dealt with human children before, creatures who could turn rules into games, boring routines into adventures, and most importantly, who could imagine impossible things and then find ways to make them possible. As the blue light from the gas giant cast moving shadows across the room, 4 young minds worked together, each adding their own special talent to the plan. The Praxians thought they were studying human children. They were about to learn that human children were studying them right back, and learning much faster. Ambassador Jack Walker had seen many strange things during his 15 years as Earth's representative to the Galactic Council, but nothing had prepared him for this. His ship had stopped at Research Station Beta 7 for what should have been a routine refueling visit. Now he stood frozen in Director First Light's office, staring at the security feeds on the wall. "As you can see," Ambassador, Director First Light said proudly, gesturing at the screens with his long gray fingers. The subjects are well cared for. We provide education, nutrition, and plenty of time for their peculiar need for play activities. Walker's face grew redder with each word. On the screens, he could see 4 human children in what was clearly a controlled environment. They appeared to be having a normal class session, but his trained diplomatic eye caught the subtle signs: the reinforced walls, the security sensors, the guard positions. Director, Walker said, keeping his voice carefully controlled, "Are you telling me that you've been holding human children here for research?" "Of course." First Light's large eyes blinked with genuine confusion. "How else could we study the developmental patterns of your species? Adult humans are too set in their ways. We needed fresh specimens to understand how humans learn their unusual behaviors." In the observation room next door, the children were doing something that made absolutely no sense to the watching Praxian scientists. They had arranged their chairs in a line and were pretending they were on a space train, complete with sound effects and dramatic scenarios about space pirates. "Look at this remarkable data," First Light continued, completely missing the growing horror on Walker's face. "When we present them with logical puzzles, they often ignore the correct solution in favor of creating elaborate alternative scenarios. Fascinating, isn't it?" Walker watched as Tom, the oldest boy, pretended to fight off invisible space pirates, while Andy made surprisingly accurate engine malfunction sounds. Rose was apparently the train's navigator, using her desk tablet as an imaginary control panel, while little Mike crawled under the chairs making repair noises. "Director," Walker said slowly, "did you obtain permission from Earth government for this research? Or from these children's parents?" First Light's head tilted in confusion. "Permission? But they are such valuable research subjects. Look how they create chaos even in controlled conditions. Yesterday, they spent an hour pretending the classroom was an ancient Earth sailing ship. Completely illogical, yet they showed remarkable cooperation and problem-solving skills during this pointless exercise." The ambassador's diplomatic training was the only thing keeping him calm. On the screens, he noticed something the Praxians had missed. The children's game wasn't random at all. Their movements were systematically testing the edges of their confinement, mapping guard positions, and examining reaction times of their captors. "What you're doing here is illegal," Walker stated firmly. "These children must be returned to their families immediately." "Illegal?" First Light seemed genuinely puzzled. "But we're helping them. Without proper logical guidance, they might continue these chaotic behavior patterns into adulthood. Did you know they can generate completely imaginary scenarios and share them with each other? It's some form of mass hallucination they call playing pretend. We must study this to prevent it from spreading." Walker pulled out his diplomatic communicator. This was going to cause an interstellar incident, but he didn't care. However, before he could send his emergency message, alarms started blaring throughout the station. On the security screens, the children's space train game had suddenly turned into something else entirely. Somehow, they had used their game as cover to trigger a cascading system malfunction. Walker watched in amazement as the supposedly secure facility dissolved into chaos. Director First Light rushed to the control panel, his long fingers flying over the controls. Impossible. They were just playing their illogical games. How did they? He stopped, staring at the screens in dawning comprehension. The games had never been just games. The children had been planning this all along, and their greatest weapon had been the Praxians' own inability to understand how a child's mind works. Alarms blared through Research Station Beta 7 as red warning lights flashed in every corridor. Director First Light's control room had turned into a scene of complete confusion. On every screen, systems were reporting errors that made no logical sense. "The environmental controls think it's raining in Section C," one Praxian technician called out. "But that's impossible. We're in space." "The gravity is randomly changing in the East Corridor," another reported. "It keeps switching between normal and zero every 10 seconds. Ambassador Walker watched all this with a mixture of horror and pride. On the main screen, he could see the 4 children putting their plan into action. They weren't just causing random trouble. This was a carefully planned attack using the aliens' own logic against them. Tom stood in the middle of their classroom, conducting the chaos like a symphony. Ready for Phase 2. He called out to the others, grinning as the artificial gravity switched off again. "Almost there," Andy shouted back. He had his hands deep inside an open panel, rerouting systems in ways the Praxians had never imagined. Their computers can't handle it when we give them conflicting commands at the same time. Rose was at the main door, calling out timing patterns. "Guard change in 30 seconds. They're all confused because their schedules are messed up." She had memorized every detail of the station's routines, and now she was using that knowledge to create perfect chaos. Mike had disappeared into the ventilation system 10 minutes ago. His voice came through the station's announcement system, singing silly Earth songs that made the Praxians' sensory organs twitch uncomfortably. Every time they shut off one speaker, his voice would come from another location. "This is impossible." Director First Light's calm, logical demeanor was cracking. "They're just children. How are they bypassing our security protocols?" Ambassador Walker found himself explaining, though he could hardly believe what he was seeing himself. "They turned your whole station into a game, Director. While you were studying them, they were learning exactly how everything works, by playing with it." On the screens, they watched as Andy activated his next surprise. Every door in the station started opening and closing in a pattern that seemed random, but was actually timed to the rhythm of "Row, row, row your boat," a song the children had been singing repeatedly for the past week. The Praxian guards were having the hardest time. Their rigid training had never prepared them for dealing with what looked like complete nonsense, but was actually carefully planned disorder. Every time they tried to follow standard procedures, they found themselves caught in another of the children's traps. "The cleaning robots have gone crazy," a guard reported over the comm system. "They're following the human children's movement patterns from yesterday." What the guard didn't understand was that those movement patterns had been a practice run. The children had spent hours playing Follow the Leader, teaching the station's automated systems to copy their chaotic paths. Phase 3. Tom yelled, and all 4 children started singing different songs at the same time. The station's audio recognition systems, programmed to monitor them for signs of rebellion, completely crashed trying to analyze 4 different melody patterns simultaneously. In the control room, Director First Light stared at his precious logical systems falling apart. "But we designed everything based on rational behavior patterns. We created protocols for every possible scenario." "That's exactly the problem," Walker said, watching as Mike's voice echoed through the station singing, "The wheels on the bus for the 100th time. You prepared for everything logical. But human children don't think logically. They think creatively." The chaos reached new heights as Rose activated the morning wake-up sequence, afternoon lunch protocols, and evening shutdown procedures all at once. The station's computer, trying to follow 3 different schedules simultaneously, gave up and initiated a complete system reboot. "They turned your own rules into a game," Walker explained to the bewildered director. "And then they won the game by breaking all the rules at once." Through all the chaos, the children's laughter echoed through the station. They weren't just escaping. They were having the time of their lives doing it. The next hour on Research Station Beta 7 proved why imprisoning human children was the worst mistake the Praxians had ever made. Rose stood at the main computer terminal, her eyes shining with excitement as she revealed what she'd discovered. "Look at this," she called to Tom, pointing at the screen. "Their whole security system is based on adult brainwave patterns. They never adjusted it for children's minds at all." Tom grinned as he understood what this meant. "So when we're just being kids, the system can't understand what we're doing." Rose finished. "It's like we're invisible when we're playing." Meanwhile, Andy had made an equally important discovery in the station's control room. He'd managed to lock 3 very confused Praxian technicians out of their own systems by introducing what he called kid logic into the computer's programming. If you tell the computer that the answer to every question is, "because I said so," it has a complete meltdown. He explained to Ambassador Walker, who was watching in amazement. "That's what my mom always says, and it never makes sense to me either." The ambassador couldn't help but laugh. The Praxians had created the most logical, orderly prison in the galaxy, only to have it completely undone by children who saw rules as suggestions and impossibility as a challenge. Deep in the station's maintenance tunnels, Mike was having the time of his life. His small size had let him access parts of the station that even the maintenance robots couldn't reach. He'd spent weeks mapping every tunnel and duct, creating his own secret highway through the station. "The grown-ups always say I'm too small," his voice echoed through the ventilation system. "But being small is awesome. I can go anywhere." To prove his point, he popped out of a ceiling panel right above a group of guards, dropped a handful of paper airplanes on them, and disappeared again before they could react. Director Firstlight was reaching his breaking point. Nothing in his centuries of logical research had prepared him for this. "How?" he demanded, watching the security feeds in horror. "How are they doing this?" "Because they're children," Ambassador Walker explained patiently. "They don't see limitations. They see possibilities. They don't follow logic. They follow imagination." The final straw came when the children decided to share their favorite Earth game with the entire station. The speakers crackled to life with all 4 young voices speaking in unison. "The floor is lava. Everyone has 10 seconds to get their feet off the ground." The Praxians, with their rigid adherence to rules and protocols, were thrown into complete confusion. Their logical minds couldn't process an announcement that was clearly false. The floor wasn't really lava, but their training demanded they respond to all emergency announcements. The result was chaos as Praxian crew members either froze in confusion or desperately climbed onto furniture, unable to decide if they should follow protocol or logic. The children, meanwhile, easily navigated through the confusion using furniture, walls, and anything else they could find as their path. "This is impossible," Director Firstlight shouted, watching his perfect system collapse. "They're violating every rule of logical behavior." "Exactly," Walker said, watching Tom swing from a hanging light fixture while Andy reprogrammed another set of doors. "They're children. Breaking rules is what they do best." Through the station's cameras, they watched as Rose discovered how to access the main communication system. Her voice rang through every speaker. "Attention, please. This is now a pillow fort. All blankets and pillows must report to the main hall immediately." The station's computer, programmed to enforce all announced rules, began redirecting cleaning robots to gather bedding materials. The Praxians could only watch as their pristine research station was transformed into what looked like a massive slumber party. "This," Director Firstlight said weakly, "this is pure insanity." Ambassador Walker smiled. "No, Director. This is childhood. And you're learning why trying to contain it is like trying to hold back an ocean with your hands." The Galactic Council chamber was in an uproar. Representatives from 27 alien species sat in their elevated seats, all talking at once. At the center of the chamber, Ambassador Walker stood calmly, playing the video evidence from Research Station Beta 7 on the main display screen. "As you can see," Walker said, his voice cutting through the noise, "the Praxians have been conducting unauthorized research on human children. This is a direct violation of at least 15 different galactic laws." On the screen, Mike's small figure could be seen crawling through another impossibly tiny space, singing "Old MacDonald Had a Farm" at the top of his lungs, while the station's security systems tried and failed to track his movement patterns. The Praxian representative, High Commander Steadymind, stood up to defend his species. "We were conducting vital research. How else can we understand the chaos that human children bring to the galaxy?" "Chaos," came a rumbling voice from the Urson section. The bear-like alien leaned forward, his fur bristling. We had a human child visit our colony last year. She taught our cubs to play something called hide and seek. It took us 3 days to find them all. More representatives began sharing their own stories. A human boy visited our space station, called out the Meridian delegate, their crystal form flickering with agitation. He taught our young ones to make paper airplanes. They're still finding them in the ventilation systems. 2 human children stayed with us during a diplomatic visit, added the Volari representative, their feathers puffing up at the memory. They invented a game called Opposite Day, and our entire communication system had to be reprogrammed. On the main screen, the video now showed Tom and Andy's successful attempt to convince the station's cleaning robots that they were actually dance instructors. The robots were attempting to perform what looked like the hokey pokey while cleaning. The point is not what human children can do, Walker said firmly. The point is that they were taken without permission and held against their will for research. The council chamber grew quiet as Rose appeared on screen, explaining to a bewildered Praxian scientist why making mistakes could be more fun than being perfect. The scientist's logical mind appeared to be having trouble processing this concept. We have received similar reports from 3 other sectors, announced the council president, a tall, ethereal being made of shifting light patterns, all involving attempts to study human children, all ending in what can only be described as creative chaos. The chamber's attention turned to a new video feed from Research Station Beta 7. Director Firstlight could be seen trying to explain to his superiors why his entire security staff was now playing something called Duck, Duck, Goose in the main corridor. The children didn't just break out, Walker explained. They turned the entire experience into a game, and in doing so, they proved exactly why imprisoning them was doomed to fail from the start. The council president's light patterns twirled thoughtfully. It seems we must establish new guidelines, not to protect human children from the galaxy, but to protect the galaxy from human children's creativity. With all due respect, Walker said, fighting to keep a straight face as the screen showed the children teaching the station's food dispensers to make ice cream for breakfast. I don't think any guidelines will help. Human children don't just break rules. They reinvent them. The evidence was undeniable. In just a few weeks, 4 human children had taken the most logically designed security system in the galaxy and turned it into what looked like a cross between a playground and a circus. Perhaps, the council president suggested, their light patterns dancing with what might have been amusement. We should simply make it a galactic law. Never attempt to imprison human children. The results are too unpredictable and expensive to risk. The journey back to Earth aboard Ambassador Walker's diplomatic vessel was anything but quiet. The 4 children had turned the ship's main lounge into what they called their victory celebration headquarters, complete with blanket forts and improvised musical instruments. So, Walker asked, sitting down with them among their pillow fortress, how did you really do it? How did you break a security system that even adult hackers couldn't crack? Tom looked up from where he was drawing a picture of Director Firstlight doing the hokey pokey. We didn't break it, he explained. We just played with it until it got confused. The Praxians made everything too perfect, Andy added, tinkering with a spare computer panel the ambassador had given him. They never thought about what would happen if someone did things wrong on purpose. Rose nodded wisely from her perch atop a mountain of cushions. They kept waiting for us to do what made sense. But not making sense was way more fun. Mike popped out from inside a ventilation duct. He'd somehow found his way into them even on this ship. And they made all the tunnels just the right size for me. It's like they built me a secret playground. Walker couldn't help but laugh. The Praxians had spent years developing the perfect containment system, only to have it completely undone by 4 kids who turned it into the galaxy's most elaborate game of make-believe. Back on Research Station Beta 7, Director Firstlight was facing a committee of Praxian scientists. The station was still in disarray. Random bursts of Earth children's songs would play from the speakers, the cleaning robots would occasionally break into dance routines, and the computer kept insisting that various floors were made of lava. In conclusion, First Light said, his voice heavy with newfound wisdom, attempting to contain human children through logical means is, to use their phrase, totally bonkers. He gestured to his presentation screen, which was covered in crayon drawings the children had left behind. They don't just ignore rules, they transform them into entertainment. The news spread quickly across the galaxy. Species after species came forward with their own stories about encounters with human children. The Meridians had to redesign their entire school system after a visiting Earth child introduced the concept of recess. The Ursans were still trying to figure out how to stop their cubs from playing red light, green light during important ceremonies. On the diplomatic ship, the children were already planning their next adventure. "Do you think we'll get to visit other alien stations?" Tom asked hopefully. "Only if you promise not to reprogram all their computers," Walker said, trying to sound stern but failing completely. "We promise," all four children said together, crossing their fingers behind their backs, just like they'd done when promising the Praxians they would behave logically. The ship's computer suddenly began playing "The Wheels on the Bus" over the intercom. Walker looked at Andy, who shrugged innocently. "It's not my fault," the boy said. The computer said it was bored and wanted to learn Earth songs. As they approached Earth, news of their adventure had already made them into celebrities. They were being called the Chaos Crew by some news stations and the Logic Breakers by others. But to themselves, they were just four kids who'd had the most amazing playtime ever. "You know what the best part was?" Rose said as Earth came into view. "We taught those aliens that being logical isn't always the right answer." "Yeah," Mike agreed, finally emerging completely from the ventilation system. "Sometimes the best answer is just to have fun." The story of the four children who turned a prison into a playground became a legend in galactic society. It was now required reading at every diplomatic training academy, usually under the title, "Why Attempting to Logically Contain Human Children is Pure Insanity, a Case Study in Creative Chaos." As for the children, they were already asking when they could go on another space adventure. After all, there were plenty more aliens out there who needed to learn how to play.